"Enjoy the view from down there," my daughter-in-law whispered as she unbuckled my seatbelt. My son, Thomas, just stood there by the open door of the private jet, his face a perfect mask of regret. Their plan was to steal my $2 billion fortune. But when they returned to my home later that week, I was sitting in my favorite reading chair with a very special surprise waiting just for them. If you're with me on this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing where my stories travel. Now, let me take you back and explain how a beautiful Wednesday afternoon scenic flight over the Grand Canyon ended with me falling 12,000 feet toward the earth. I suppose I should have seen the signs, the little cracks in the foundation of our family. But at 68, after burying the love of my life just 2 years prior, I still clung to the belief that family was an unbreakable bond, that love was stronger than greed. The morning had started with such promise. Thomas had called me himself, not through his secretary, which honestly should have been the first glaring red flag. He invited me on a celebration flight. "Mom, we want to celebrate you getting a clean bill of health from the cardiologist," he'd said, his voice dripping with a sweetness I mistook for genuine relief. Just the three of us, a real family outing. I had been recovering from a mild heart attack for 8 weeks, a scare that had left me feeling vulnerable and acutely aware of my own mortality. I was desperate for any sign that my son and his wife, Clara, still saw me as their mother, and not just the keeper of the Vance family fine foods fortune my dear Arthur had built from scratch. Since Arthur's passing, a chill had settled between us, a distance I couldn't seem to bridge. So I dressed with care that morning, choosing a cashmere sweater set in periwinkle blue, the one Arthur always said matched my eyes, and let their driver take me to the private airfield. The jet was a marvel, a sleek silver bird that cost more than a small town. Thomas met me on the tarmac with a hug that felt more like a photo opportunity than a genuine embrace, while Clara watched from the top of the stairs, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor's edge. "Isn't she a beauty, Mom?" Thomas asked, gesturing at the plane. "We're thinking of taking her to Aspen for Christmas." He conveniently left out that they'd purchased it with the $5 million I had given them as a seed investment for his new, sustainable energy venture. A company I was starting to suspect was nothing more than a fancy letterhead and an empty office. The first hour of the flight was idyllic. We soared over the painted desert, the landscape unfolding beneath us in breathtaking hues of red and gold. Clara served champagne and chattered about their plans to remodel my old estate, the one I'd signed over to them thinking it was too large for just me after Arthur was gone. I had downsized to a penthouse condominium, believing a simpler life was in order. But then, the conversation took a turn. Thomas started asking questions, innocently at first, about the final details of my will, about the family trust, about whether I'd thought about streamlining things to make it easier for them when the time came. "It's just that estate taxes can be such a nightmare, Mom," he said, topping off my glass with a little too much enthusiasm. "We just want to be sure everything is protected." It was then I noticed Clara, filming me with her phone. She wasn't obvious about it, holding it at a slight angle, pretending to be capturing the scenery outside, but the lens was pointed directly at me. At me, sipping champagne, at me, discussing sensitive financial matters. They were manufacturing evidence. The pieces of their cruel puzzle began to slam into place with a sickening finality. My heart scare. They had insisted on managing all the hospital discharge papers, the updated power of attorney they'd had me sign, claiming it was a temporary measure to handle my affairs while I focused on my recovery. The strange way my longtime financial advisor had suddenly become impossible to reach, his calls always going to voicemail. "Thomas," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands as I set my glass down. "I think I'd like to head back now." That was when the curtain fell, and the monster wearing my son's face was revealed. "I'm afraid that's not on the itinerary, Mom." His voice was flat, cold, devoid of any warmth. "You see, we need to address your cognitive decline, your memory lapses." Memory lapses? I, who could still recite the ingredient list for every one of our company's 342 products. "You've been exhibiting clear signs of dementia," Clara added, her voice smooth as silk as she moved closer. "We have it all documented. Your doctors are in agreement that you're no longer fit to manage your own affairs." "That's preposterous," I shot back, But even as the words left my mouth, I understood the depth of their betrayal. We were thousands of feet in the air, miles from anywhere. No other planes in sight. Just the three of us, the vast, empty sky, and their diabolical scheme. "Mom, we're doing this for your own good," Thomas said, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "We can do this the easy way, where you sign over the final transfer documents, or we can do it the hard way." I rose slowly from my seat, my heart pounding not from fear but from a white-hot rage. "And if I refuse?" That's when Clara truly smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Well," she said with a dismissive shrug, "an elderly woman, recent heart condition, perhaps she got confused and took too much of her medication, became disoriented during the flight." She gestured towards the open sky. "Tragic accidents happen. It's a long way down. This boy, whom I had nursed through fevers, taught to read, whose college tuition I had paid without a second thought, whose lavish wedding I had funded, was now nodding in agreement as his wife laid out the plot for my murder. You are both certifiably insane if you think you will get away with this," I hissed. "Actually, Mom, we've been very thorough." Thomas produced a leather-bound folder. "Your signature right here, transferring all remaining assets to our control for your protection, and we land this plane and get you the help you need." I looked at the forged documents, at the greedy anticipation on my son's face, at Clara's phone, which was still recording. Then I looked out the open door at the endless blue chasm below, and it somehow seemed less terrifying than the two people who were supposed to be my family. "Go to hell," I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's when Clara moved behind my chair and uttered those chilling words about the view. The push was almost gentle. They were too clever for a struggle. Just a sudden, firm shove while I was off balance. And just like that, I was tumbling out of the jet, my periwinkle sweater a flash of color against the sky. As I fell, I heard Thomas shouting, a theatrical, "Mom! My God, Mom!" for the benefit of the cockpit recorder. But I also heard Clara's voice, sharp and businesslike, speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes, the assets will be freed up by Friday. Have the Swiss account ready for the transfer. The petition for conservatorship will be made effective immediately." Then the wind roared in my ears, and I had more pressing concerns than their treachery. I'm not an acrobat, and I'm certainly not a skydiver. But my Arthur had been a pilot, and he'd insisted we all take basic parachute lessons years ago. Just in case, he'd always said. They had strapped a pack to my back before the flight, calling it a safety precaution for flying over the canyon. I fumbled for the ripcord, my fingers numb, my mind screaming. I pulled it. Nothing. A stream of silk fluttered out, useless, a cruel joke. They had packed it to fail. I was plummeting, the canyon floor rushing up to meet me, and I closed my eyes, a prayer for Arthur on my lips. That's when I saw the ledge. It wasn't much, a rocky outcrop covered in a deep drift of snow, nestled in a part of the canyon so remote and inaccessible it was practically untouched by man. My fall was broken by a series of impacts with pine branches that tore at my clothes and skin, and then I plunged into the snowdrift. The world went white, then silent, then black. When I awoke, I was shivering so violently I thought my bones would shatter. My ankle was screaming in pain, and a man with a weathered face and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen was leaning over me. "Holy smokes, ma'am, I thought you were a weather balloon," he said, his voice a low rumble. Captain Sam Reynolds was exactly the kind of man you'd expect to find living off the grid in the middle of nowhere. A retired geologist in his late 60s with a moral compass that pointed true north, something clearly missing in my own lineage. "What in God's name happened to you?" he asked as he and his nephew, a young man named Leo, carefully loaded me onto a makeshift stretcher. I was in shock, my teeth chattering too hard to form words. Sam wrapped me in a thick wool blanket that smelled of pine needles and coffee while Leo spoke into a satellite phone. My family," I finally managed to stammer. "The plane. We saw it," Sam said, his expression grim. "Flew right on, didn't circle, didn't slow down. Never seen anything like it." "What kind of people just fly away after someone falls out of their plane?" Leo asked, his young face a mixture of confusion and horror. The kind who stand to inherit $2 billion if I'm no longer around, I thought. But all I said was, the kind who aren't really family. Sam was talking to the park rangers on his sat phone. This is Eagle's Nest. I've got a female, conscious, appears to have fallen, needs immediate medical evac. Wait, I said, grabbing Sam's arm with what little strength I had. Please, don't. Don't let them know you found me. Not yet. Sam looked at me, his sharp eyes taking in my torn clothes and the terror in my own. He saw more than just an accident victim. He saw a woman running from something far worse than a fall. You in some kind of danger, ma'am? Yes, I breathed, but not the kind you think. I need to get somewhere safe, somewhere no one knows I survived. Can you help me? Leo looked at his uncle, his expression uncertain. Uncle Sam, we have to and should do are two different trails, son, Sam said slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. Sometimes the right path ain't the one on the map. He raised the phone again. Eagle's Nest to base. Disregard that last call. False alarm. Just some camping gear that must have blown off a cliff. All clear out here. As we made our way to a hidden cabin he used as a research base, I told them everything. The money, the betrayal, the documents, the attempted murder. Sam listened intently, his jaw tightening with every sordid detail. So they figured they'd rather be wealthy orphans than wait for their inheritance, he said when I'd finished. That seems to be the gist of it. So what's your next move? He asked. That was the billion-dollar question. As far as Thomas and Clara knew, I was a tragic smear on the canyon floor. They'd land, feign shock and horror, report the accident, and set their lawyers loose on my estate. But being dead, I realized, gave me a freedom I never had when I was alive. I'm going to let them think their plan worked, I said, a strange calm settling over me. And then, I'm going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. Sam broke into a slow grin, the first I'd seen. Now that, he said, sounds like a plan I can get behind. Leo drove us under the cover of darkness to a small, dusty town on the outskirts of the park. Sam knew a woman there, a fierce, no-nonsense woman named Maria, who ran a small, secluded motel. Cash only, no questions asked, was her motto. Maria, a woman in her 70s with a face carved from the very canyons around her, took one look at my bruised and battered state, listened to Sam's 30-second explanation, and simply nodded. Room 7 at the end. I'll bring some stew and the first aid kit. Honey, she said as she cleaned a cut on my forehead, I've had folks hiding from cheating spouses, the law, and their own bad decisions. Long as you're not bringing trouble to my doorstep, you're safe here. That night, while my son and daughter-in-law were no doubt giving tearful interviews to the press about their beloved mother's tragic accident, I was sitting in Maria's kitchen, wearing borrowed clothes and plotting their demise. Sam had agreed to be my connection to the outside world. He was a respected figure in the local community, and he could make inquiries without raising suspicion. What I don't get, I said, nursing a cup of Maria's strong black coffee, is how they thought they'd make it all legal so fast. Even with an accident, there are investigations, legal processes. That's been nagging at me too, Sam agreed. They must have someone on the inside, a lawyer, a judge, someone pulling the strings. That night, I made a list. Everyone who had intimate knowledge of my finances, my lawyers, my accountants, the trust managers at the bank. Someone had betrayed me long before I was pushed out of that plane. Someone had greased the wheels for Thomas and Clara, and I was going to find out who. But my first step was to see exactly what lies they were spinning. Maria's old office computer was slow, but it worked. I spent hours reading the news reports. Billionaire matriarch Eleanor Vance presumed dead in tragic Grand Canyon accident. The articles were filled with quotes from a devastated Thomas, talking about my recent bouts of confusion and memory issues. Clara had given a heartbreaking performance to a reporter about how they had been so worried about my frailty following my heart scare. They had even provided a photo of me, taken at my last birthday party. In it, I looked tired and a little dazed. I remembered that moment perfectly. I was dazed because they had just announced they had sold my husband's beloved collection of classic cars, something they had promised me they would never do. But in the photo, stripped of context, I just looked like a confused old woman, the perfect victim. The online obituary was the final insult. Eleanor Vance, beloved mother and philanthropist, passed away while enjoying a scenic flight with her devoted son and daughter-in-law. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations be made to the Dementia Research Foundation. They were using my death to build their fake narrative. Bastards, I muttered, slamming the laptop shut. Maria looked up from her account books. Planning a special welcome home party for them? Oh yes, I said, a cold fire spreading through my veins. Something they'll never forget. The memorial service was a grand affair, held at the botanical gardens I had funded. From a distance, hidden in a service vehicle with Sam, I watched through a pair of high-powered binoculars. Thomas had spared no expense. A string quartet played somberly, there were massive arrangements of my favorite flowers, and a program with a professionally touched-up photo of me on the cover. He and Clara stood near a memorial plaque, dressed in tasteful, expensive black, accepting hugs and condolences. What was most painful was seeing the genuine grief on the faces of some of my friends. My bridge club was there, dabbing their eyes. My old friend Sarah from the museum board was openly weeping. These people truly cared for me, and my own son was using their grief as a prop in his disgusting play. See anything useful? Sam asked, keeping his voice low. Besides my son's Emmy-worthy performance as a grieving heir, look at who's missing. Sam raised his own binoculars. Who? My estate lawyer, Jonathan Pierce. My head accountant, Marcus Thorne. The two people who have managed my family's wealth for over 30 years. The pieces were locking into place. The very people who should be here, comforting the grieving family, are conspicuously absent. Maybe they're busy handling the estate, Sam suggested. Or maybe, I said, lowering the binoculars, they can't bear to look my friends in the eye while being complicit in my murder. After the service, I watched Thomas and Clara glad-handing the guests, their faces masks of perfect sorrow. But I also saw how quickly they steered people away who started asking too many specific questions about the accident. That evening, as Sam drove me back to the motel, I felt a new sense of clarity. I had been officially dead for 5 days, and I was beginning to see the power my new status afforded me. I need to get into my penthouse, I told him. That's a whole new level of risky, Eleanor. They'll have changed the locks. They'll have people watching it. Not according to the building's online resident portal. The ownership hasn't officially transferred. My name is still on it. And they're not living there. They're staying at the estate. They think I'm dead. Who would be watching it? I pulled out a notepad where I'd been scribbling my thoughts. But someone has been accessing my private computer network remotely. My IT guy sent me a security alert email the day before the accident. I thought it was spam. Now I think someone was planting something or stealing something. What do you think you'll find? The truth, I said. I hope. That night, dressed in dark clothes Maria had found for me, I felt like a burglar breaking into my own life. Sam dropped me off a few blocks away. The doorman, a young man I'd always been kind to, was on his dinner break, just as Maria had found out with a quick, friendly phone call. I used my old service key to enter through the basement. My home felt alien. It was clean, too clean, sterile. I moved through the silent rooms, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Everything was in its place, yet it felt wrong. In my home office, the room where I spent most of my days, I found it. My computer had been wiped, but they were arrogant. They hadn't counted on the backup system Arthur had installed, a ghost drive that was completely independent. It took me 2 hours, but I finally bypassed their security lockout. And then I saw it, a folder, hidden deep in the directory, labeled The Sunset Project. My blood ran cold. It was a meticulous, detailed plan for my death. It had started over a year ago. They had carefully manipulated situations to create a record of my decline. A doctored email from my doctor expressing concerns about cognitive slippage. Audio snippets from conversations, cleverly edited to make me sound confused. The birthday party photo. They had deliberately given me the wrong date for the party, then snapped a picture of my bewildered expression when I arrived a day early. The medication incident a few months back, where I'd accidentally taken a double dose of my heart medication. They had switched the labels on the bottles. Every stumble, every moment of forgetfulness, had been twisted and logged as another nail in the coffin of my sanity. The most damning file was a series of encrypted emails with someone identified only as JC. The last message was chilling. The timeline has to move up. E is asking her financial advisor too many questions about the energy investment. If she digs any deeper, the whole project is compromised. We need to proceed to the final phase within the week. The final phase, my murder. I was saving the files to a secure flash drive when I heard the chime of the private elevator. My heart leaped into my throat. Headlights from the street below swept across the windows. They were coming here. I grabbed the flash drive and slipped out the service door, my heart hammering against my ribs. As they stepped out of the elevator, their voices echoed in the hall. "Do you think Sarah was convincing enough at the service?" Clara asked. "She cried on cue," Thomas replied. "That's what I paid her for. What about Pierce and Thorne?" "They're getting nervous. They want their final payout. JC says he'll handle them after the probate clears." I crept down the service stairs, my mind reeling, but as I reached the ground floor, I heard a sound that stopped me dead. The faint sound of a baby crying. Coming from the apartment next to mine. An apartment I knew for a fact had been vacant for 6 months. A baby. Thomas and Clara had always been adamant they never wanted children. This changed everything. Crouching in the darkened stairwell, listening to the cries of a hidden infant, I knew this was no longer just about my money. It was about something far more sinister. Sam was waiting for me at the agreed-upon corner, his face etched with worry. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said as I slid into the passenger seat, my body trembling. "Worse," I said. "I think I've found one." I told him everything. The Sunset Project, the mysterious JC, and the baby. "A baby?" Sam repeated, his brow furrowed. "They never mentioned wanting a kid." "They were vehement about not wanting one," I confirmed. Thomas said his career was too important. Clara said she wasn't the maternal type. I held up the flash drive. "Whatever is on here, it's the key. We need to find someone who can decrypt the rest of these files without leaving a trace." Sam knew a guy, of course. A reclusive tech genius living in a cabin an hour away who owed him a favor. While we waited, we sat in Sam's truck, the flash drive feeling like a ticking bomb in my hand. "So, they've been planning your murder for over a year," Sam summarized, "systematically creating a false medical history with at least 2 of your most trusted advisors in on it. And now, there's a secret baby. Either they've been lying to me for years about wanting a family," I said, a new, horrifying thought dawning on me, "or that baby isn't theirs." "What are you implying?" "Think about it, Sam. If your goal is to secure a dynasty, to ensure the $2 billion fortune stays in your line forever, you need an heir, a legitimate legal heir." Sam's kind eyes were filled with a dawning horror. "You think they bought a baby? Or stole one?" "I think," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I had never known, "that JC is the key to all of it, and I think that child is in terrible danger." The decrypted files were a portrait of pure evil, a year-long conspiracy in chilling detail. Fake medical assessments, forged psychiatric evaluations, and financial models projecting the growth of my fortune after they took control. But the final decrypted file was a birth certificate. Baby boy Doe, born 4 weeks ago. Mother, Jane Doe. Father, Thomas Vance. The document was a blatant forgery. I had seen Clara just a week ago on that jet. She was not a woman who had given birth a month prior. "This is fake," I told Sam, my finger tracing my son's name. "Completely and utterly fabricated." "Then who is that baby?" he asked quietly. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the motel bed, the quiet hum of the air conditioner doing nothing to drown out the racing of my thoughts. My son and his wife had methodically plotted my murder, paid off my closest advisors, and procured a child from an unknown source to secure their inheritance. The next morning, a new resolve hardened within me. "I'm going back," I told Sam over breakfast. "But not to the penthouse. I'm going to follow them." That's suicide, Eleanor. If they spot you, they won't be looking for me. I'm dead, remember? I spread a map of the city on the table. They have to be keeping that baby somewhere. A nanny, a secret apartment, something. Babies don't just vanish while their parents attend memorial services. And what do you hope to find? The truth, I said, and the identity of JC. Maria, who had been silently refilling our coffee cups, finally spoke. There's a man I know, a private investigator, owes me a favor from way back. He's the best. Discreet, thorough, and very good at finding things people don't want found. I can't involve anyone else, I started to say. Honey, Maria said, placing her hands on her hips. You are so far past handling this on your own. These people tried to kill you. They won't think twice about finishing the job. She was right. But a PI meant more people knowing my secret, expanding the circle of risk. What kind of favor does he owe you? I asked. Maria's lips curved into a wry smile. The kind that kept her nephew out of prison for a youthful misunderstanding involving a stolen casino chip. His name is Frank Miller, ex-cop, very good at making complications go away. By that afternoon, I was sitting in Frank Miller's cluttered office above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread a strange contrast to the ugly story I was telling for the third time in a week. Frank was in his 50s, with tired eyes that didn't miss a single detail. So, let me get this straight, he said after I finished, leaning back in his creaky chair. You want me to tail your murderous son and daughter-in-law, identify the mastermind JC, and find out the origin of a secret baby, all while you're officially deceased. That about sums it up. And your method of payment, seeing as your assets are about to be seized by your heirs? I slid an envelope across his desk. Emergency cash. My husband always said to have a rainy day fund they didn't know about. I suppose this qualifies as a storm. Frank thumbed through the bills, a substantial retainer, and gave a slow nod. I'll need photos, addresses, everything you have. I gave him a copy of the flash drive. He studied the encrypted emails, paying close attention to the initials JC. JC, he mused, tapping a pen on his desk. Rings a bell. Mind if I run this through some old contacts? Do whatever you have to. One more thing, Frank said as I stood to leave. We need a dead man's switch. You check in with me every 12 hours, no exceptions. If I don't hear from you, this entire file goes straight to the U.S. Attorney's office. I agreed, praying it wouldn't come to that. For now, I needed to operate in the shadows. That afternoon, I went back to Maria's motel to wait, to plan, and to nurse the cold fury that was now my constant companion. I had professional help now, and within 48 hours, I would know exactly who had tried to turn me into a ghost, and why. Frank Miller was more than good. He was a bloodhound. By the end of the second day, he had a clearer picture of Thomas and Clara's lives than I'd had in years. Your son has been a busy little bee since your passing, Frank said, laying out a series of surveillance photos on Maria's kitchen table. Meetings with bankers, lawyers, and this. He slid a photo to the center of the table. Thomas and Clara, shaking hands with a man in a tailored suit outside a gleaming downtown skyscraper. Julian Croft, Frank said, runs a boutique wealth management firm called Croft Legacy Partners. Very exclusive, very discreet. JC, I mouthed, the letters burning in my mind. He specializes in complex estate transitions for the ultra-wealthy, Frank continued, and according to my sources, complex is code for hostile. Frank laid out more photos. Julian Croft meeting with other families, all of them wealthy, all of them with elderly relatives who had recently died under interesting circumstances. A sudden fall down the stairs, an unexpected illness, a tragic car accident. He's running a murder-for-hire business for greedy heirs, I whispered, my stomach churning. He provides the strategy, the legal cover, and the connections to make it happen, Frank confirmed. He identifies wealthy seniors with strained family ties, helps the heirs build a case for incompetence, and then, when the time is right, an accident occurs. He takes a hefty percentage of the inheritance as his fee. How many? That I can prove? None. That I suspect? At least a dozen in the last 5 years. He's a ghost. always insulated by layers of lawyers and shell corporations. And the baby? Frank's expression darkened. That took some digging. Croft also has a connection to an international adoption agency, one that specializes in private placements from Eastern Europe. They find vulnerable young women, pay them for their babies, and create false paperwork to place the children with wealthy clients, the birth mothers. They often disappear from the records after the delivery. They didn't just buy a baby to be their heir. They bought him to cover their tracks, to create a story of a loving family deserving of my fortune. And the child's real mother was likely dead or discarded. About that, Frank said, pulling out a final grainy photo. It was Julian Croft, talking to another man in a shadowy parking garage. Recognize him? He asked. I looked closer. The other man was my accountant, Marcus Thorne, my accountant of 20 years, the man who had managed my investments, who had advised me, who had sat at my dinner table. He was part of it. He had fed them my financial data, helped them identify my assets, and likely helped them forge the documents. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. We have to stop him, Frank. We will, he said. But first, we need to know what they're planning next, because according to my source at the courthouse, they filed the final probate papers this morning. They're claiming you died without a valid will, making them your sole heirs. But I have a will, I insisted. A detailed one. I know, Frank said, sliding a document across the table. It was my will, with what looked like my signature. But the contents were all wrong. It left everything, unconditionally, to Thomas, with a clause for any future children. A clause for the baby they had bought. I walked to the window, looking out at the vast, indifferent desert. Just a week ago, I was a grieving widow trying to reconnect with her son. Now I was a ghost, hunted by a criminal syndicate, my only son at its dark heart. There's something else, Frank said, his voice grave. About the baby. The birth mother was a 19-year-old Ukrainian girl, an orphan named Anya. She was brought to the U.S. a few months ago. According to the agency's records, she died of a sudden embolism shortly after childbirth. The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it made me sick. They killed her, I said. It wasn't a question. No body, no proof, just a paper trail that goes cold, Frank said, packing up his photos. What I can prove is that your son, your accountant, and Julian Croft are part of a criminal enterprise. And tomorrow, they're having a celebration dinner at your old estate to finalize the transfer of your entire fortune. I sat back down, my mind a whirlwind of grief and rage. Where? The main dining room, 8 o'clock. I looked at Maria, then at Sam, then at the photos of my son smiling alongside a professional murderer. Well then, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. I suppose it's time for Eleanor Vance to make a resurrection. The most difficult part of coming back from the dead is choosing the perfect moment for your grand entrance. I could have gone to the police, but Croft had insulated himself too well. It would be my word, the word of a confused old woman, against a mountain of his forged documents. No, this required a more personal touch. You want to do what? Frank asked, nearly dropping his coffee when I laid out my plan. I want them to see me, I explained. I want them to know I'm alive, but not how much I know. I want to sow chaos and paranoia. I want to watch them turn on each other. Maria nodded slowly, a glint in her eye. Psychological warfare. I like it. The plan was audacious. While Thomas, Clara, Marcus, and Julian Croft were enjoying their victory dinner, I would become the ghost at their feast. Frank had discovered they were keeping the baby, with a private nurse, in the estate's guest house. The nurse, a woman named Linda, was hired through a shell corporation owned by Croft. Linda's clean, Frank had assured me. Single mom, good record. She has no idea she's caring for a stolen baby. Then she deserves to know the truth, I had said. So, that evening, while the conspirators were preparing to toast their success, I stood on the doorstep of the guest house and rang the bell. Linda, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, opened the door, a baby monitor clipped to her uniform. "Can I help you?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Hello, Linda," I said, offering a small, sad smile. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I believe you're looking after my grandson." The color drained from her face. She recognized the name. It had been plastered across every news channel for a week. "But the paper said, you're dead." "The reports were, shall we say, premature," I said gently. "May I come in? I think you and I have a great deal to discuss." She stepped back, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear, staring at me as if I were an apparition. I walked into the living room, and there he was, a beautiful, perfect baby boy, sleeping peacefully in a bassinet. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled, my knees washed over me. "Oh, you sweet thing," I breathed, reaching out to gently touch his soft cheek. The room was filled with the best of everything: expensive toys, designer baby clothes, a state-of-the-art air purifier, a gilded cage for a stolen child. "What is his name?" I asked, my voice thick. They haven't officially named him yet," Linda stammered. "They just call him the baby." "Of course they do," I said softly, "because he's not a person to them. He's an asset." Linda sank onto the sofa, her composure crumbling. "I don't understand what is happening. They told me they were grieving, that they needed privacy." "Linda," I said, my voice firm but kind, "I need you to listen to me. That child is not their biological son. He was purchased through a criminal organization run by Julian Croft. His birth mother, a young girl named Anja, died under highly suspicious circumstances right after he was born. And 6 days ago, my son and his wife tried to murder me to steal my fortune and raise this child as their heir." That's monstrous," she whispered. I laid out the evidence, copies of the files from the flash drive, Frank's surveillance photos. I showed her everything, watching as her disbelief turned to righteous horror. "The girl who gave birth to him was 19, I said quietly. "An orphan with no one to look for her when she vanished. They told her she was giving her baby to a loving couple." Linda was weeping now, her gaze fixed on the sleeping infant. "He's all alone in the world." "Yes," I said, "and if they get away with this, he will grow up in a house of lies, his entire life built on the foundation of his mother's death and mine." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want you to be my eyes and ears. Document everything, every conversation you overhear, every visitor. And I want you to help me ensure this child is raised knowing the truth of who he is and the brave young woman who gave him life." Linda wiped her eyes and nodded, a new strength in her expression. "His name should be Arthur," she said, "after your husband, and Anja. Arthur Anja Vance." "That's beautiful," I whispered. I spent another hour with Linda and the baby, who I now thought of as Arthur, planning the next steps. Linda agreed to stay on, to be our inside source. "They'll be here soon," she said as I prepared to leave. "They're having a dinner party in the main house." "I know," I said, "and I've already sent my RSVP." While I was with Linda, Frank had been busy. He'd had a special delivery made to the estate, a single, perfect periwinkle blue cashmere sweater, identical to the one I was wearing when I was pushed from the plane. It was delivered to the dining room just as the four of them, Thomas, Clara, Marcus, and Croft, were sitting down to their first course. It was placed in the empty chair at the head of the table. According to Frank, who was watching from a distance with a telephoto lens, the reaction was instantaneous. Panic. Clara dropped her wine glass. Thomas went pale. Croft's cool demeanor shattered. The psychological warfare had officially begun. And now, for the main event. I wasn't just a ghost. I was a reckoning. And I was about to crash their party. I was standing in the grand foyer, in the shadows of the very staircase I had taught Thomas to walk down, when they came stumbling out of the dining room, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Hello, darlings," I said, stepping into the light. "I do hope I'm not interrupting dessert." Clara let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound of pure, primal fear. Thomas simply stared, his mouth agape, his skin the color of ash. Marcus Thorne, my accountant, looked like he was about to have a heart attack himself. Only Julian Croft regained his composure quickly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Well," he said, his voice a low purr, This is an unexpected complication. Is it? I asked, allowing myself a small, cold smile. I have to say, the service was lovely, though I found the choice of music a bit dreary. And dementia, Thomas? Really? Couldn't you have come up with something more original? Linda appeared at the top of the stairs, holding baby Arthur, just as we had planned. Mrs. Vance asked me to bring the baby, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She wanted to meet her grandson. Her grandson? Clara finally found her voice, a strangled croak. Linda, this woman is dead, I supplied. Yes, we've established that. It turns out I'm a rather poor flyer, but I'm a surprisingly resilient lander. Thomas finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. Mom, we thought, the search parties were looking for a body, dear, I said, walking towards the baby. A formality. Funny how that works when the only witnesses are the murderers. I took the baby from Linda's arms, my heart swelling as I held him close. Hello, little Arthur Anya, I murmured. I'm your grandmother. The real one. His name is not Arthur Anja, Clara snapped, a flicker of her old arrogance returning. He is our son. Is he? I looked from the baby's dark, curious eyes to hers. Tell me, Clara, how was the delivery? Because when I saw you on that jet a week ago, you didn't look like a woman who had recently been through childbirth. It was a private surrogacy, she stammered. Yes, I'm sure it was very private, I said, my voice dropping. So private that the birth mother, Anja, died and was disposed of. Did you even know her name? A 19-year-old orphan from Ukraine. Did you ever stop to think about her? The silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus Thorne was sweating profusely. That's a lie, Thomas said, but his voice had no conviction. You would never... Never what, Thomas? I interrupted, my voice rising with a fury I could no longer contain. Never conspire with a professional sociopath to murder your own mother? Never systematically destroy her reputation? Never buy a human child and discard his mother like trash? Which part exactly is beyond the realm of possibility for you? Croft stepped forward, taking control. Prove it, he said smoothly. You can spin whatever fanciful tales you wish, but you have no proof. Oh, Julian, I said, shaking my head in mock pity. That's where you're wrong. Linda, would you mind taking Arthur back to the guest house? The adults have some business to discuss. After Linda had left with the baby, I walked to the fireplace, turning to face them. Sit down, I commanded, using the same tone of voice I had used to run a billion-dollar company. They sat. For the past week, while you were counting your chickens, I've been gathering eggs, I said, pulling a manila folder from a hidden pocket in my coat. I tossed a stack of photographs onto the coffee table. Photos of them meeting with Croft. Photos of Marcus Thorne handing over financial documents in a parking garage. Photos of the forged will. This, I said, pointing to Croft's picture, is Julian Croft. He runs what he calls a legacy planning firm. In reality, he helps wealthy, morally bankrupt children murder their elderly parents for their inheritance. This is absurd, Croft scoffed, but his eyes darted nervously towards the photos. Is it? Because I have evidence of 12 other families, 12 other tragic accidents all linked to you. Like Mr. Henderson, age 82, who accidentally overdosed on his heart medication 2 weeks after his daughter hired you. She inherited $50 million. I looked directly at Thomas. These aren't theories, son. This is a business model, and you are his newest clients. We never killed anyone, Clara said quickly. Even if what you say about him is true, we didn't kill anyone. Really? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. What about Anja? What about the 19-year-old girl you left to die? We didn't know, Thomas pleaded. Didn't know that Croft was running a black market baby ring? Didn't know that vulnerable young women were his primary source? Didn't know you were accessories to murder after the fact? I pulled out another document, a copy of Anya's falsified death certificate. She died of a sudden embolism, but a source inside the clinic told my investigator that she was perfectly healthy until Croft's personal doctor administered a vitamin shot just moments before she coded. Your investigator? Thomas asked weakly. Oh yes, You didn't think I'd face a pack of wolves alone, did you? I have a private investigator, I have financial records, I have whistleblower testimony. I paused, letting the weight of it all sink in. And I have something else. I walked to the library table and picked up a small, ornate clock. I opened the back and removed a tiny digital recorder. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every lie, every denial, every incriminating statement. I held up the recorder. The good news is, you're all going to be famous. Croft lunged for the recorder, but I was ready. I sidestepped him, and he sprawled onto the expensive rug. "What do you want?" Thomas asked, his voice broken. "What do I want?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I want my life back. I want that innocent child to have a future, free from you. I want Julian Croft and his entire network of ghouls to be exposed and brought to justice. And I want the two of you to spend every waking moment for the rest of your miserable lives knowing that you traded your mother for money and lost." "And if we help you?" Clara asked, ever the opportunist. "If you cooperate," I said. "If you give me everything you have on Croft and his operation, I might consider not telling the prosecution about the part where you pushed me out of a plane. The fraud, the conspiracy, the accessory to murder charges, those are non-negotiable." I looked at the three of them, their faces pale with dawning horror. "You have until sunrise to decide." They made the wrong choice. Instead of seeing the lifeline I had offered, they saw only a threat to be eliminated. I found this out at 4 a.m. when Frank Miller called Maria's motel, his voice urgent and grim. "They're not cooperating, Eleanor. They're escalating. I've been monitoring their communications. They spent the last 3 hours on a conference call with Croft and a man they referred to as the specialist." The implication was immediate and terrifying. "What kind of specialist?" "The kind that cleans up loose ends, permanently. They're planning to kill you again, Eleanor, and this time, they'll make sure there's a body." Maria, who had been listening on the extension, didn't hesitate. Within minutes, Sam was at the door with his truck, and we were on the move, evacuating to a remote cabin Frank had prepared for just such a contingency. "How long do we have?" I asked as we sped through the dark, empty roads. "Not long. The specialist they've hired is a professional. He's flying in from Miami. He makes murders look like suicides or accidents. Flawless record." The safe house was a rustic cabin deep in a national forest, accessible only by a single dirt road. "This is madness," I said, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee as the sun began to rise. "My own child has hired a hitman to have me killed." "Money makes monsters of men," Sam said quietly. Frank arrived an hour later, his face grimmer than ever. "It's a network, Eleanor. Bigger than we imagined. Croft isn't just a consultant, he's a franchisee. This is a national organization." He spread a new set of photos and documents on the cabin's rough-hewn table. "I've identified nearly 40 suspicious deaths across 5 states, all with the same MO: wealthy seniors, estranged families, sudden accidents." "How do they get away with it?" I asked, horrified. "They have insiders, medical examiners, local cops, estate lawyers. It's organized crime for the AARP set." Maria, who had come with us, was studying a photo, her brow furrowed. "This woman," she said, pointing to a surveillance shot of a woman meeting with Croft. "I've seen her." "Where?" "At the senior center where I volunteer. She was there last month, claiming to be from a social services agency. She was asking a lot of questions about which members had family that never visited." Frank and I locked eyes. "She was scouting for new victims," he said. "And now they're coming for you with everything they have, because you're the first one who ever got away," Sam added. "Then we need to make sure my story is heard before they silence me for good." I spent that morning writing. I wrote down everything, every detail, every name, every date. If they got to me, the truth would not die with me. But then Frank's satellite phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression unreadable, then ended the call. "They found the specialist," he said, dead, in his hotel room. A single clean shot. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Croft is cleaning house. He's erasing anyone who can link him to the murders, and that includes Thomas and Clara." A part of me, a dark, wounded part, felt a cold knot of satisfaction. Let them feel the terror of being hunted by the monster they had invited into our lives. But Sam shook his head. You're not thinking it through, Eleanor. If Croft is eliminating witnesses, that list includes you, and it also includes that baby. An orphaned infant is a loose end he can't afford to leave. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Arthur Anja. He'll have him killed too, Frank said. A crib death, a house fire, something that destroys the evidence along with the child. I shot to my feet, knocking over my chair. We have to get him out of there. It's a trap, Eleanor. They'll be watching the estate, waiting for you to make a move for the baby. Good, I said, my voice trembling with a terrifying new resolve. Then I'll give them exactly what they're waiting for. The plan was insane, a desperate gamble with the highest possible stakes. I would walk into the lion's den. I would let them capture me, let them think they had finally won. And I would trust Frank and Sam to get me and that innocent child out alive. This is the most reckless idea I have ever heard, Maria said, her arms crossed as we prepared to leave the cabin. It's the only way to save that child, I replied, checking the miniature recording device Frank had given me, and the only way to get Croft to confess to his entire operation. Frank, it turned out, had a trump card he hadn't played. He wasn't just an ex-cop. He was a former FBI agent, now working as a private contractor for a special task force investigating organized elder abuse. My case had just blown his investigation wide open. Croft is on his way to the estate now, Frank explained as we drove back toward civilization. He told Thomas and Clara to keep you alive until he gets there. He wants to know how much you know and who you've told before he stages your suicide. They think I'm trading my life for the babies, I said. They have no idea the entire property is now a federal stage. The estate was wired. Linda, our brave woman on the inside, had let Frank's team in during the night. There were cameras and microphones in every room. Linda and baby Arthur were hidden in a secret panic room Arthur had built years ago, ready to be evacuated. Are you sure about this? Sam asked as we approached the rendezvous point. I'm sure, I said, my heart pounding, that if I don't do this, my son's greed will lead to the death of an innocent child, and that is not a legacy I'm willing to leave. I walked up the long, familiar driveway at sunset. Thomas answered the door. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his face gaunt and terrified. Mom, he choked out, and in that one word, I heard the ghost of the little boy I had raised. Hello, Thomas, I said calmly. I believe you were expecting me. Clara was in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. He's on his way, she said, not looking at me. Croft, he wants to talk to you. I'm sure he does, I said. Mom, Thomas began, his voice breaking. I never wanted... But you let it happen, I finished for him, my voice devoid of emotion. You let it happen because $2 billion was worth more than your mother. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Julian Croft arrived at precisely 8:00 p.m. He was impeccably dressed, a portrait of calm, corporate evil. Mrs. Vance, he said, extending a hand I did not take. So glad you could join us. We have so much to discuss. I have nothing to say to you, I said. He sat across from me in my late husband's favorite chair and opened his briefcase. You have caused my clients a great deal of distress, he said, as if discussing a business deal gone wrong. And you, it seems, are far more resourceful than we anticipated. So tell me, who have you spoken to? Murder is a messy business, Julian. It leaves trails. I prefer to think of it as accelerated estate planning, he corrected me with a chilling smile. We provide a service. We help families unburden themselves from the financial and emotional toll of a lingering elderly relative. The elderly people you murder, I clarified. What service do you provide for them? A dignified exit, he said without a hint of irony. An end to their suffering and confusion. We allow their families to remember them in their prime. I stared at him, truly seeing the monster before me. How many? He consulted a file in his briefcase as if it were a client list. Over the last decade, my associates and I have successfully managed the final transitions of 41 individuals whose continued existence posed a significant financial burden to their heirs. 41 murders, I whispered. He was confessing. It was all being recorded. And I'm to be number 42? Ah, no, he said with a slight frown. You would be 43. We had to resolve a small matter with a specialist earlier today. But yes, you will have another tragic accident tonight. And the baby, of course. A terrible gas leak, perhaps. These old houses can be so unpredictable. He looked at Thomas and Clara, who were sitting stone-faced on the sofa. The baby is a loose end. His origins are complicated. It is far cleaner to have you all perish together. A tragic family story that leaves behind a very tidy, uncomplicated inheritance for the Dementia Research Foundation, which, coincidentally, is a charitable trust I control. And that's when I smiled. Mr. Croft, I said clearly, I think you should know something. And what is that? You're on candid camera. The doors and windows burst open simultaneously. A flood of FBI agents in full tactical gear swarmed the room. Julian Croft, a stern-faced agent announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and 41 counts of murder. Croft actually tried to run. He was tackled before he took 3 steps. Thomas and Clara just sat there, frozen in shock, as agents read them their rights and cuffed them. The lead agent, a woman named Chen, turned to me. That was incredibly dangerous, Mrs. Vance, and incredibly brave. Frank was there, smiling. The whole thing had been a perfectly executed sting. We've been after Croft's network for years, Agent Chen explained as crime scene techs swarmed the house. But he was always insulated. He never got his hands dirty. Until tonight, when he confessed to being a serial killer on a federally monitored wire. Linda emerged from the panic room with baby Arthur, both safe. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I said, taking the baby into my arms. The legal battle was long and messy. Thomas and Clara, faced with overwhelming evidence, took plea deals. Thomas got 30 years to life. Clara got 25. They testified against Croft. His network was systematically dismantled. In the end, 28 people were arrested, including Marcus Thorne. The investigation uncovered a conspiracy that had stolen nearly $500 million from its victims. But the real victory was Arthur Anja Vance. With the help of the state, I legally adopted him. We even found his mother's distant relatives in Ukraine, who were heartbroken to learn of her fate, but grateful that her son was safe and loved. His name is Arthur Anja, I told the family court judge. Arthur for the grandfather who would have adored him, and Anya for the brave young mother who gave him life. The judge, a woman who had followed the case in the news, smiled warmly. I think his mother would be very proud. It's 5 years later now. I'm 73, and my life is full. Arthur is a bright, joyful little boy who knows his story. He knows his mother, Anya, was a hero. He knows that the people who tried to be his parents were lost to a terrible greed. And he knows that family isn't about who you're born to, but who shows up to save you. Maria still runs her motel, though now she hosts an annual senior safety workshop, teaching others how to spot the signs of financial abuse. Sam still roams his canyons, but he visits us often, a beloved honorary grandfather to Arthur. Frank, Agent Miller, retired from the FBI, but he sends a card on the anniversary of my resurrection every year. Thomas writes to me from prison sometimes, long, rambling letters of apology and regret. I never write back, because what I learned from my brief time as a dead woman is that true wealth has nothing to do with money. It's about love, integrity, and the courage to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It's a lesson I plan to spend the rest of my life teaching my grandson. Thanks for listening to my story. A new story is told here every single day, so if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss tomorrow's. And if you'd like to see another story that will surprise you, click on one of the videos you see on the screen now. You won't be disappointed.